The autumn air in Vermont carried a crisp chill, the kind that hinted at the coming of winter, but still smelled faintly of pine and wet earth. Emily Dawson leaned her head against the passenger seat window, absently rubbing her growing belly as Mark steered their old Honda Civic up the winding country road. She smiled when the baby kicked. "He's restless," she said softly, turning toward her husband. Mark reached over and squeezed her hand. "Just like his mom. Never sits still." They laughed, the sound filling the car, light and full of hope. The Dawsons had been married for 3 years, and this cabin trip was meant to be their last quiet escape before life changed forever. Online photos of the rental had shown a rustic charm, a promise of peace and seclusion in the woods, a place where Emily could breathe and Mark could clear his head before the responsibilities of fatherhood arrived. The GPS led them off the main road, onto a dirt path lined with maples losing their leaves in fiery bursts of red and gold. The afternoon sun spilled through the branches, painting the world in shifting shadows. Emily closed her eyes, imagining how this memory would feel years later, the two of them, alone, dreaming of the future. But what no one knew then was that this road, this cabin and that single weekend would become the subject of whispers for over a decade. Before I take you further into this unsettling journey, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. That way you won't miss any of our gripping stories where hidden truths finally come to light. The Dawsons reached the cabin at dusk. It stood deeper in the woods than they had expected, surrounded by tall pines that seemed to press inward, as if guarding a secret. The porch sagged slightly, and the shutters creaked against the wind. Emily hesitated, clutching Mark's arm. "It looks older than the photos." Mark gave a reassuring smile, though his own unease flickered behind it. "Pictures lie. It's fine. It's just for the weekend." He grabbed their bags and pushed open the front door. The hinges groaned. Inside, the air smelled faintly of damp wood and something metallic. Dust motes danced in the light of their flashlight beam. Emily rubbed her arms. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. A faint hum seemed to come from somewhere beneath the floorboards. Mark shrugged it off, saying, "Old houses make noise." They unpacked in silence, trying to ignore the heaviness that seemed to settle around them. By the time night fell, the forest outside was cloaked in stillness. Not even crickets chirped. Emily sat by the fireplace, tracing circles on her stomach, while Mark fiddled with his phone. There was no service. He tried the cabin's landline, but the cord was dead. "Maybe it's part of the charm," he joked weakly. But Emily wasn't laughing. She kept staring at the floor, at the way the boards seemed uneven in one corner of the room. She didn't know why, but she felt as if the house itself was listening. The next morning, when neighbors noticed the car parked by the cabin, they assumed the couple was enjoying their stay. By Sunday night, when the car was still there but no lights glowed inside, whispers began to stir. And when Monday came with no sign of the Dawsons returning home, a missing persons report was filed. Local police scoured the woods, volunteers combed the trails, calling their names. The cabin was searched, photographed, and catalogued, but the Dawsons were gone, vanished without a trace. Families mourned, newspapers speculated. Some claimed it was a tragic accident in the wilderness. Others murmured darker theories, foul play, secrets, cover-ups. But as the weeks bled into months, and months into years, the story faded from headlines, leaving only rumors behind. What no one could explain, what no one dared to question openly, was why parts of the cabin's design seemed to shift in every report. Rooms appeared on one inventory but not another. Measurements never matched. And beneath the silence of official records, one truth remained hidden, waiting for the right person to stumble upon it. That person would not arrive until 12 years later, and her discovery would change everything. The first few months after Emily and Mark Dawson vanished were marked by urgency and noise. News stations from Boston to New York picked up the story. Headlines called them "The Expecting Couple Who Disappeared in Vermont." Flyers with their smiling faces papered telephone poles, grocery store windows, and gas stations. Family and friends stood before cameras pleading for information, but time is a ruthless thief. As seasons shifted, the search dwindled. By the first anniversary, fewer volunteers showed up to comb the woods. By the second, newspapers only gave the case a short paragraph in their unsolved columns. By the third, it was little more than a whisper carried by locals who spoke of it in lowered voices. Emily's parents stopped attending public vigils, retreating into private grief. Mark's younger brother, Jason, grew bitter, often lashing out at law enforcement for what he called incompetence. The official line was that the Dawsons had either wandered too far into the wilderness or chosen to disappear deliberately. Both explanations felt like insults to those who knew them. The cabin itself remained, but it became the object of suspicion and avoidance. Travelers who booked it cancelled once they learned its history. Locals swore the property carried a curse. Hikers told stories around campfires of strange sounds drifting from the woods at night. But as the years passed, the story lost its grip. Life moved on for everyone else except for those bound by loss. By the 12th year, the Dawsons were remembered mostly by family and by a handful of residents who couldn't quite let the mystery go. Among them were older hikers who met in a small cafe near the trailheads every Saturday morning. They traded stories, half out of habit, half out of hope. It was there that Sarah Mitchell first heard their names. Sarah wasn't from the area. She had grown up in Connecticut and had moved north to Vermont for its trails and the promise of endless mountains. A competitive trail runner, she thrived on paths that were rugged and unpredictable. At 29, she had already run 2 ultramarathons and was training for her third. But what set her apart wasn't just endurance, it was curiosity. That Saturday, she had ducked into the cafe after a long run, her shoes still streaked with mud, her hair tied back in a loose braid. She ordered a black coffee and found a spot near the window. As she sipped, she overheard 2 men at the next table discussing the couple who vanished. One of them, his hands rough and his jacket worn, leaned forward and whispered, "The cabin that swallowed people. You won't find it on any new maps, but it's still there, just waiting." Sarah tilted her head slightly, trying to catch more. The second man chuckled nervously. "Don't go telling outsiders that nonsense. People'll think you've lost it." The first man replied, "I haven't lost anything, but I know what I saw. That place ain't right." Sarah carried their words with her long after leaving the cafe. The rhythm of her feet on the trail couldn't shake the image of a cabin that swallowed people. She didn't believe in curses, but she believed in unanswered questions. That night she sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, searching. Old articles filled the screen, photos of Emily with her rounded belly, Mark with his boyish smile. She read through reports of the initial investigation, saw the faces of their grieving parents, and felt a knot in her chest. The Dawsons weren't just names in a fading story. They were real, their absence an open wound. Sarah leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. "Why hasn't anyone solved this?" she whispered aloud. The silence of her apartment gave no answer. But something inside her stirred. As she closed her laptop, she felt a pull, a quiet insistence that the story wasn't finished, that perhaps after all these years, someone still needed to look. What Sarah didn't realize was that her curiosity would place her on the same path the Dawsons once traveled, one that led straight toward the truth hidden in the woods. The morning fog clung low to the mountains, curling between the trees like smoke. Sarah's breath came in steady bursts as she ran, her shoes crunching against the gravel path. Training had always been her meditation, a way to lose herself in the rhythm of motion. But today her mind was restless. The story of the Dawsons gnawed at her, the couple's faces flashing across her thoughts with every step. She followed her usual loop at first, the kind she could run blindfolded. Yet when she reached a fork in the trail, her eyes drifted toward the less trodden path, veering to the left. It wasn't part of the official route, at least not anymore. The entrance was half hidden by branches, as though the forest itself wanted to erase it. Sarah slowed, hands on her hips as she studied it. Her GPS watch buzzed, reminding her to keep pace, but she ignored it. The words she had overheard in the cafe returned like a whisper. The cabin that swallowed people. With a breath that was half curiosity, half defiance, she stepped off the main trail and onto the forgotten path. The air felt different here, cooler, heavier. The silence pressed in, broken only by the sound of her shoes on damp earth. The trail narrowed quickly, winding through clusters of pines. Fallen branches snagged at her legs, and thorny underbrush tore at her socks. She glanced at her watch again. The digital map showed nothing, just blank space where the trail should have been. A prickle ran down her spine. "Weird," she muttered, her voice too loud in the stillness. She kept moving, driven by something she couldn't quite name. The path rose sharply, then dropped into a hollow where the ground seemed unnaturally flat, as if shaped by human hands. Her chest tightened. She slowed, scanning the trees. To the untrained eye, it looked like ordinary forest. But Sarah noticed details: the outline of stone beneath moss, a half-buried post, remnants of what once marked territory. She knelt and brushed away dirt from one stone, uncovering the faintest trace of a carved letter. It was too worn to read, but the shape suggested it had once been meaningful. Standing again, she felt her pulse quicken. "Am I crazy for following this?" she whispered. Yet she couldn't turn back. Deeper along the path, the trees grew denser. Branches clawed at the sky, blotting out the sun. Her GPS blinked, recalculating, then gave up entirely, leaving her with nothing but the red line of her heart rate across the screen. The trail ended abruptly at a clearing. Sarah froze. Ahead, barely visible through overgrowth, stood the remnants of something unnatural in this wilderness. Squared beams, half collapsed, swallowed by ivy. She stepped closer. It wasn't a house, not anymore, just a scar of construction that shouldn't exist. She circled the structure slowly, heart hammering. The air smelled faintly metallic, just as the articles had described. Her throat tightened. Could this have been part of the cabin the Dawsons rented? She snapped a photo with her phone, though she knew it would capture little more than shadows. The thought of showing anyone made her hesitate. Who would believe her? To most people, she was just a runner who liked exploring hidden trails. Sarah crouched near the foundation, her fingers brushing the soil. The dirt felt disturbed, softer than it should be after so many years. She thought of Emily, of Mark, and of the child who never had a chance to live. The story wasn't distant anymore. It pressed against her like the damp air around her skin. Her instincts warred within her. She could turn back now, return to the safety of marked trails and forget what she had seen. Or she could dig deeper, risk trespassing and suspicion, all for the chance of unearthing what others had missed or ignored. The sound of a crow broke the silence, its call harsh and lonely. Sarah straightened, gripping her phone tightly. "This isn't nothing," she whispered to herself. "Something happened here." She took one last look at the strange clearing before turning back toward the trail. The forest seemed to watch her leave, each step carrying the weight of a secret it had been forced to guard for far too long. Sarah didn't know it yet, but her choice to follow that forgotten path had already tied her fate to the Dawsons. The following week, Sarah couldn't shake the image of the strange clearing. During her runs, she replayed every detail in her mind: the broken beams, the disturbed soil, the unnatural stillness. She told herself it was just an old hunting lodge, or maybe a storage shed left behind decades ago, but deep down, she knew it wasn't ordinary. On a misty Saturday morning she returned. The forest seemed to remember her, branches crowding low as though urging her back. She pressed on, her shoes squelching in the wet earth until the same forgotten trail revealed itself. This time she walked with deliberate steps, alert to every sound. Her breath caught when she broke into the clearing. What she had seen before, half-hidden wood, a collapsed outline, was still there, but now she noticed more. The overgrowth she had assumed was random, concealed, sharper angles. A roof line sloping, walls half buried, shutters hanging from rusted hinges. Her chest tightened. It wasn't a ruin of lumber. It was a cabin. She moved closer, brushing vines away to reveal the front door. A heavy chain crossed it, secured with a padlock weathered by years of rain. She reached out, fingers trembling, and tugged. The chain rattled but held fast. Her pulse pounded. Who would lock up a place like this and leave it to rot, she murmured. Circling the cabin, she spotted a side window. Its glass was cracked, one corner jagged and open to the air. Sarah crouched, slipped her arm through, and pushed until the frame gave way. With a deep breath, she hoisted herself inside. The air struck her first, stale, musty, heavy with the scent of mold and something metallic beneath it. Dust coated the wooden floor, but not as thickly as she expected. Someone had been inside more recently than the cabin's outward decay suggested. Sarah's shoes creaked against the boards. She paused, heart racing, listening. The silence pressed so heavily it seemed alive. She ran her hand along the wall, feeling rough timber beneath her fingertips. The main room held a stone fireplace, a sagging sofa, and a table with one leg splintered crudely by a block of wood. Her eyes scanned the corners, noting every detail. On the mantel lay a rusted lantern. Near the door, faint marks on the floor looked like scratches, as though heavy furniture had been dragged across it. Sarah whispered to herself, "This doesn't feel abandoned." Her runner's instinct, the same one that pushed her to finish races when her body screamed to stop, kicked in. Fear battled with resolve, but curiosity won. She moved further in, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. In the back she found two small rooms. The first was bare except for a broken chair and a torn curtain. The second looked like a bedroom, a frame with no mattress, a dresser with missing drawers, and a cracked mirror leaning against the wall. She caught her reflection and startled. Her face looked pale, eyes wide, framed by sweat-damp hair. She forced a steadying breath. "Get it together," she muttered. Stepping back into the main room, her eyes fell on the corner where the floor dipped strangely. It was subtle, but the unevenness made her stop. Kneeling, she pressed her palm flat against the boards. They felt colder here, almost hollow. Sarah sat back on her heels, staring at the uneven patch. She wasn't ready to name what it meant, but the thought it could be more than a flaw in the floor gnawed at her. Her phone buzzed faintly. Low battery. She checked her GPS, but the screen showed nothing but static lines where the trail should have been. No map, no clear marker. The cabin didn't exist on the system at all. She stood, her decision made. She needed to leave before darkness set in, but she knew she would return. The Dawson's story, the whispers, the chained door, the hollow floor, it was all connected. As she climbed back out through the broken window, the forest seemed to exhale, branches swaying as if closing behind her. Sarah jogged away, her pulse still racing. She didn't have answers yet, only questions that deepened with every step she took back toward town. One thing was certain, this cabin wasn't supposed to be here. Rain fell hard the following afternoon, but Sarah couldn't wait for clear skies. The memory of the uneven floorboards tugged at her thoughts with relentless persistence. She returned to the cabin, a rain jacket clinging to her shoulders, mud sucking at her shoes as she trudged through the forest. By the time she reached the clearing, her heart already beat faster. Not from the run, but from the weight of anticipation. Inside, the air smelled heavier than before, damp with rain seeping through broken shingles. She swept her flashlight across the main room, fixating on the corner where the boards dipped. The sound of raindrops hitting the roof above created a steady drumbeat, as though urging her forward. Sarah crouched, pressing her hands against the uneven wood. She tapped lightly, then harder. The hollow thud echoed beneath her touch. Her pulse spiked. "There's something under here," she whispered. Running her fingers along the edge, she found the faint outline of a square hatch, its seams nearly invisible beneath layers of dust and grime. Her throat tightened. It hadn't been in any of the reports she had read. No mention of a basement, no diagram showing an underground level. She hesitated, palms slick. Opening it could mean trespassing deeper than she already had, crossing a line from curiosity into danger, but the thought of walking away gnawed at her more fiercely. "You came this far," she muttered to herself. "Don't stop now." Wedging her flashlight between her knees, she pulled at the hatch. At first it resisted, sealed tight by years of neglect. She braced her feet and yanked harder. With a reluctant groan, the wood shifted, dust billowing upward in a choking cloud. A dark hole yawned beneath her, a square mouth in the floor. The air that rose from it was stale, tinged with rust and something sharp, something metallic that caught at the back of her throat. She gagged slightly, covering her nose with her sleeve. Pointing her light downward, she saw a steep wooden ladder, its rungs swollen and dark with age. The beam of her flashlight revealed only a fraction of the space below: stone walls, damp earth, the hint of boxes stacked in the shadows. Her mind screamed at her to stop, but her body moved anyway. She lowered one foot onto the ladder, testing it. The wood groaned but held. She descended slowly, each creak echoing louder than the last, until her shoes sank into damp soil at the bottom. The basement was small, no larger than a single room, but the air was heavy, pressing against her lungs. She swung the light around. Boxes were piled along the walls, cardboard warped from moisture. Some had burst open, revealing blankets, shoes, and scattered papers. Sarah knelt, picking up a child's toy. A rattle, its colors dulled with age. Her chest tightened. She set it down quickly, fingers trembling. She moved deeper, brushing past cobwebs. On one wall hung hooks with coats still draped across them, mildewed but intact. Beside them, an old suitcase sat half open, clothes spilling out like someone had left in a hurry but never returned. Her thoughts swirled. Who had been down here, and why had no one else found it? Her flashlight flickered and panic shot through her. She smacked it against her palm until it steadied. The darkness pressing in made her dizzy. She steadied herself, whispering, "Stay calm, just stay calm." A metal glint caught her eye on the far wall. She approached, crouching low, and found a lockbox half buried in the dirt. She tried to lift it, but it was heavier than expected, rust cementing its edges to the ground. She left it where it was, breath shallow. The thought hit her hard. This basement wasn't supposed to exist. Sarah forced herself back up the ladder, each step creaking like a warning. She shoved the hatch closed behind her and leaned against the wall, heart hammering. Her jacket clung to her skin, soaked with both rain and sweat. She whispered into the empty room, "I need to tell someone." Yet the fear of being accused of breaking in gnawed at her. If she spoke, would anyone believe her? Her mind spun with the choice before her. Report it and risk being dismissed, or worse, implicated, or keep searching on her own. As she stood there, the rain outside fell harder, drumming against the cabin roof. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her decision. The following morning, Sarah woke with a heavy weight pressing against her chest. Sleep had done little to erase the image of that basement. The hooks with coats, the half-open suitcase, the rattle lying in the dirt. She tried to convince herself it was just remnants from past visitors, forgotten junk stored away. But deep down, she knew what she had seen felt personal, too intimate to be dismissed. By mid-afternoon, she was back at the cabin. The rain had cleared, leaving the forest damp and glistening, a faint mist curling above the ground. Her shoes squelched against the mud as she forced herself inside again. The cabin smelled stronger now, mustier, as if disturbed air had awakened something. Her flashlight beam cut through the gloom. She crossed the room with steady determination and pulled open the hatch once more. This time, the ladder seemed even weaker beneath her weight, every step warning her to turn back. She ignored it, pushing forward until her feet met the damp soil below. Her light swept across the basement walls. The rattle was still where she had left it. The suitcase remained half open, but her gaze snagged on a box shoved into the farthest corner, partially hidden behind others. She approached, crouching to drag it out. The cardboard tore easily in her hands, wet and fragile from years underground. Inside lay a bundle of fabric. Sarah tugged it free, shaking off dust. It was a baby blanket, soft once, but now faded, its edges frayed. Across one corner, embroidered letters spelled out ED in delicate thread. Her throat tightened. Emily Dawson. She sank onto the dirt floor, clutching the blanket. Her mind raced. This wasn't junk or forgotten storage, this was evidence. It had belonged to the Dawsons, left behind in this hidden basement no one was supposed to know existed. Her pulse hammered as she whispered, "They were here." For several long minutes she sat frozen, staring at the fabric. She thought of Emily, 8 months pregnant, carrying this blanket for the baby she never had the chance to meet. The weight of that realization pressed tears to Sarah's eyes. She blinked them away, forcing herself to breathe. Shoving the blanket back into the box, she rose and searched further. Papers scattered across the floor caught her attention. She knelt, brushing away dirt until words surfaced. Receipts, pamphlets, and a crumpled reservation confirmation with the Dawsons' names faint but legible. Her stomach dropped. This was proof. More than rumor. More than speculation. The Dawsons had made it to the cabin. They hadn't vanished before arrival, as some reports suggested. They had been here, inside these walls, above this basement. Her flashlight flickered, and she quickly steadied it. She couldn't let fear consume her now. She folded the confirmation slip and tucked it into her pocket, her hands trembling. The air felt heavier, the silence sharper. For the first time, she considered what might happen if someone caught her here. Trespassing charges, suspicion, accusations that she had planted the evidence herself. She imagined standing before police officers trying to explain. Would they believe her, or would they dismiss her as a thrill-seeker who had gone too far? She clenched her jaw. "If I walk away, no one will ever know," she said under her breath. "But if I speak up, I could give their families the truth they've waited 12 years for." The choice twisted inside her. Climbing back up the ladder, she sealed the hatch with shaking hands. The cabin felt suffocating, its walls closing in as if guarding its secrets. She hurried to the window and slipped out into the damp forest air. Outside, the sky had cleared, but Sarah felt no relief. She gripped her pocket where the confirmation slip pressed against her leg. The blanket's image burned into her mind. She had crossed a line she couldn't retreat from. Walking back toward the trail, her footsteps quick and uneven, she knew one truth above all. The Dawsons' disappearance wasn't a mystery anymore. It was a buried story, and she had just unearthed its first chapter. The diner smelled of frying bacon and strong coffee, a comforting normalcy that didn't match the storm of thoughts running through Sarah's mind. She sat in a corner booth, her jacket still damp from the mist outside, a folded piece of paper pressed tightly in her pocket, the Dawsons' reservation slip she had taken from the basement. Her fingers tapped the table as she replayed every detail of what she had seen. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes, poured her coffee and asked, "Long run this morning?" Sarah forced a smile. "Yeah, longer than usual." The woman nodded knowingly and shuffled off, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. The chatter of the room floated around her, locals catching up on gossip, farmers discussing weather, hikers talking about trail conditions. She listened absently until a word caught her attention: Dawsons. At the counter, two older men spoke in low tones, their faces serious. One shook his head. 12 years gone and still no answers. That poor family never got peace. The other leaned in, lowering his voice further. Peace? There won't be any. That cabin should have been burned to the ground years ago. Place is cursed, I tell you. Sarah's chest tightened. She couldn't stay silent. Sliding out of her booth, she approached cautiously. "Excuse me," she said softly. "You were talking about the Dawsons." Both men looked at her warily. The first cleared his throat. "You're not from here, are you?" "No," Sarah admitted. "I moved up a couple of years ago. But I've heard about what happened. I can't stop thinking about it." The second man frowned. "Best you stop now." "Some stories don't do you good." "I just want to understand," Sarah pressed. "What do you mean about the cabin?" The first man leaned back, his expression clouded. "That place has a history. Folks rented it, then vanished. Not just the Dawsons. But no one likes to talk about it." The second man cut him off sharply. "Enough, Bill. Don't go filling her head with nonsense." "Let it be." Their dismissal stung, but Sarah caught something in Bill's eyes, a flicker of fear, not indifference. He believed what he was saying. She returned to her booth, her pulse racing. The blanket, the slip in her pocket, and now these whispers. It all lined up. The community carried pieces of the truth, but fear had sealed their mouths. A shadow fell across her table. "You're digging into the Dawsons, aren't you?" Sarah looked up sharply. A man in his late 50s stood there, tall, his shoulders broad but stooped with age. His grey hair was cut short, and his weathered face carried lines carved by years of stress. His eyes were sharp, though, piercing in a way that made Sarah straighten. "Yes," she said carefully. "I've been reading, asking questions." He slid into the booth across from her without invitation. "Name's Miller, retired detective. I worked the Dawson case back when it was fresh. Sarah's throat tightened. Then you know what happened. Miller shook his head slowly. No one ever knew officially, but I had my suspicions. He lowered his voice. The cabin wasn't right. Reports didn't match up. Records went missing, and when I pressed too hard, my superiors told me to drop it. Sarah leaned forward, her heart pounding. Why? He hesitated, his gaze flicking to the other diners before locking on her again. Because certain people in this town didn't want answers. Howard Greaves owned that cabin back then, still does technically. He's wealthy, connected, and untouchable. The name meant nothing to Sarah, but the weight in Miller's tone made it clear it should. I found things in that basement, she whispered, things that prove the Dawsons were there. Miller's eyes narrowed, the faintest spark of recognition flickering. Then you're already in deeper than you realize. Sarah swallowed hard, her hands trembling under the table. She had come looking for truth, but now she saw the truth came with danger attached. The clatter of dishes and hum of conversation filled the silence between them. Miller finally leaned back and said, If you're smart, you'll walk away. If you're stubborn like me, you'll keep digging. Just be ready. This town won't thank you for stirring up ghosts. Sarah met his gaze, determination hardening inside her. I'm not afraid of ghosts. I'm afraid of silence. Miller studied her for a long moment, then gave the faintest nod. Then you'd better watch where you step. The air outside the diner felt colder than when Sarah had walked in. She pulled her jacket tighter and hurried toward her car, Miller's words echoing in her ears. You're already in deeper than you realize. The drive home was quiet, but her mind buzzed. The name Howard Greaves stuck with her like a thorn. She searched it online the moment she got through her apartment door. Results filled her screen. Photos of a smiling older man shaking hands at charity events, sponsoring local festivals, cutting ribbons for new businesses. His reputation was spotless, at least in public. But Miller's warning gnawed at her. Connected, untouchable. That wasn't the kind of description you ignored. Her phone buzzed. A text from Miller. Meet me tomorrow, 10 a.m., outside the library. Don't talk to anyone else. Sarah stared at the message, conflicted. She wanted answers, but she also felt the creeping weight of fear. If Greaves was as powerful as Miller implied, stirring up his name could paint a target on her back. That night, sleep came in fragments. She dreamed of the cabin, of climbing down the ladder into a basement that grew deeper and deeper, the rattle echoing until it turned into a baby's cry. She jolted awake, sweat dampening her shirt, the sound lingering in her ears. The next morning, she met Miller. He wore a worn leather jacket, his expression grim. Without greeting, he handed her a folder. Old notes, copies I kept hidden. Nothing official. You won't find these in the records. Sarah flipped through the pages. Photos of the cabin, witness statements, police memos with whole sections blacked out. Her pulse quickened as she spotted one photo, the front of the cabin, door chained, exactly as she had seen it. They told the public the Dawsons never made it there, Miller said, but I had evidence they did. That blanket you found, that's what I was missing 12 years ago. I couldn't prove it then. You might be able to now. Sarah looked up sharply. If you suspected Greaves, why didn't you push harder? Miller's jaw tightened. Because every time I did, files vanished. Witnesses changed their stories. My job was on the line. And I had a family to think about. His eyes dropped, voice heavy with regret. I chose them over the truth. Sarah felt a pang of sympathy, but also frustration. And now you want me to keep digging? Alone? You're not alone, Miller said firmly. But you need to understand, Greaves isn't just a landlord. He donates to the sheriff's office, funds the local paper, keeps businesses afloat. People owe him. People fear him. If you challenge him, you'll find doors slammed in your face. Sarah clenched her fists. So what's the alternative? Pretend none of this matters. Let the Dawsons stay forgotten. Miller's silence stretched before he said, The truth costs. You have to decide if you're willing to pay it. She stared at him, her chest tight. She thought of Emily, the baby blanket embroidered with ED, the life stolen before it began. How could she walk away knowing what she had seen? Her phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her. An unknown number. Stop asking questions. Some stories are better left buried. Sarah showed Miller the message, her hands trembling. His face hardened. They're watching already. Fear surged through her, sharp and real. She swallowed it down, gripping the folder tighter. Then I don't have time to waste. Miller studied her for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. You've got fire, Mitchell. Just don't let it burn you alive. Sarah turned toward the library doors, the folder pressed against her chest. She felt the weight of choice bearing down. To stay silent and safe, or to fight for the truth and risk everything. And she already knew which path she would take. Sarah spent the next few nights hunched over her laptop, the glow of the screen her only light. The folder from Miller lay open beside her, its contents spread across the table. Photographs, faded notes, and redacted reports. She felt like she was piecing together a puzzle where half the pieces had been deliberately hidden. Her instincts told her the key wasn't just in the cabin, it was in the money, property ownership, rental records, financial trails. If Greaves was involved, there had to be fingerprints somewhere, even faint ones. She pulled up archived real estate listings, scrolling through old databases until her eyes burned. Again and again, she saw properties tied to shell companies, LLCs with meaningless names. One in particular appeared several times, Northwood Holdings. Its registered agent changed every few years, but the mailing address always led back to an office connected to Howard Greaves. Her stomach sank. He wasn't just renting out one cabin. He had dozens of listings under different names, cabins scattered across Vermont and New Hampshire. She whispered into the silence, how many people disappeared without anyone noticing? The thought chilled her. If the Dawsons weren't the only ones, how deep did this go? Her concentration was broken when her laptop flickered. At first she thought it was just a weak battery, but then a warning popped onto her screen. Unauthorized access detected. Sarah froze. Files began vanishing one by one, entire folders emptying before her eyes. She yanked the power cord out of the wall, but it was too late. When the screen went black, her work was gone. Her chest tightened with panic. No, no, no. She slammed the lid shut and buried her face in her hands. Whoever had sent that text was now erasing her trail. They weren't just watching. They were inside her computer. The knock on her door made her flinch. She moved slowly, peering through the peephole. Relief flooded her chest when she saw Miller. She opened the door quickly. They hacked me, she blurted. Everything I found, it's gone. Miller stepped inside, his jaw tight. I told you they don't play fair. He pulled a yellowed envelope from his jacket and tossed it on the table. That's why I kept paper copies. Sarah opened it with shaking hands. Inside were old photocopies, property deeds, transaction records, receipts tied to Northwood Holdings. They were grainy but legible. Why didn't you show me these before, she asked, frustration mixing with relief. Because once you have this, there's no going back, Miller said quietly, and I had to be sure you weren't going to run at the first sign of trouble. Sarah met his gaze, her voice steady. I'm not running. He gave a curt nod. Then here's what you need to know. Greaves hides behind layers of companies. On paper, he looks clean, but follow the rentals. Unregistered payments, fake names, sudden disappearances of records. It all traces back to him. I could never prove it in court. Maybe you can. Sarah sifted through the papers, her pulse steadying with determination. Each document felt like a weapon, a way to cut through the lies. If this is true, then the Dawsons weren't the only ones. There could be more families still waiting for answers. Miller's eyes darkened. That's exactly what keeps me up at night. Sarah leaned back, the weight of it pressing against her. She had entered this thinking it was about solving one couple's disappearance. Now she saw it was bigger, tangled in money, power, and fear. For the first time, doubt clawed at her. Could she fight this alone? What if Greaves's reach extended further than she imagined? But then her hand brushed against the paper slip in her pocket, the Dawsons' reservation she had carried since the day she found it. The reminder hardened her resolve. She wasn't fighting for herself. She was fighting for them. Miller watched her silently, then said, "You've got one chance. Be smarter than they expect. Don't confront him until you have enough to bury him." Sarah nodded, gripping the papers as though her life depended on them, and maybe, she realized, it did. Sarah spread the photocopied documents across her kitchen table, arranging them into a rough timeline. The clutter of papers looked chaotic, but patterns were beginning to form. She ran her finger across one receipt after another, piecing together the Dawsons' final days. Emily and Mark had booked the cabin online 12 years ago. Payment confirmed. Their arrival date matched the weekend they vanished. Sarah pulled the crumpled reservation slip from her pocket and placed it at the center of the timeline. It was the anchor, undeniable proof they had been there. Her heart pounded as she layered newspaper clippings alongside the receipts. Headlines declared, "No evidence couple ever reached cabin." But Sarah knew the truth. The records showed otherwise. The official story was a lie. She leaned back in her chair, frustration bubbling. "Why cover this up?" she whispered. "Who gains from pretending they never arrived?" Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. Miller's gravelly voice filled her ear. "Find anything?" Sarah exhaled. "More than enough. The Dawsons checked in. I've got the slip, receipts, and booking confirmation. The reports that said otherwise, false." A pause stretched on the line before Miller replied. "Then you've cracked the timeline. That was always the hole. Without it, the case couldn't move forward." Sarah frowned. "But why would law enforcement claim they never arrived?" "Because if they admitted it, they'd have to explain why no trace was found after, and that would lead straight to Greaves." Sarah rubbed her temples. The thought of systemic failure chilled her more than the cabin itself. "So they buried it." "Exactly," Miller said quietly. "I saw it happen." "They wanted it forgotten." The weight of it pressed on her chest. She thought of Emily's parents, Mark's brother, all those years of not knowing. The betrayal deepened her anger. "They deserve the truth," she said firmly. Miller's tone hardened. "Careful. The sheriff's office won't thank you for reopening wounds. You put this out there, they'll push back. Hard." "I don't care," Sarah snapped. "I can't just sit on this." Silence followed. Then Miller sighed. "You've got guts, but guts aren't always enough. Gather more before you go public." After the call ended, Sarah stared at the timeline again. The Dawsons' path was clear. Booked the cabin, arrived, disappeared. Simple, devastating, undeniable. Yet the official narrative erased the middle piece as if they had evaporated into thin air. She rose from her chair and paced the apartment. Every step fueled her anger. The cabin wasn't just a physical place, it was a hole in the truth, swallowing evidence, swallowing lives. Her thoughts circled back to the basement, the blanket, the suitcase, the rattle. Artifacts of a life interrupted. Combined with the receipts, they painted a picture that couldn't be ignored. But when she imagined walking into the sheriff's office with her findings, her stomach twisted. They had dismissed Miller years ago. Why would they listen to her now? The next morning, she decided to try anyway. She walked into the small-town station, the timeline neatly folded in her bag. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. A deputy at the desk looked up, his expression polite but distant. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Yes," Sarah said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "I have information about the Dawson case." At the mention of the name, his smile faltered. "That case is closed, ma'am." "No," Sarah said firmly, pulling the slip and documents from her bag. She laid them on the counter. "They were at the cabin." "I can prove it." The deputy scanned the papers briefly before pushing them back toward her. His tone cooled. "We appreciate your concern, but the department already reviewed every lead. Sometimes people disappear. Best to leave it alone." Her jaw tightened. "So you're ignoring evidence?" His eyes hardened. "I'm telling you for your own sake, let it go." Sarah gathered the papers with trembling hands, fury burning in her chest. As she walked out into the morning sun, she realized the battle ahead wasn't just against Greaves. It was against an entire system that had chosen silence over truth, and that made her more determined than ever. The days that followed left Sarah restless. Every time she glanced at the papers spread across her table, she saw the same pattern: lies, omissions, and deliberate silence. The sheriff's office had dismissed her, but their refusal only deepened her conviction. If the official channels wouldn't act, she had to push further on her own. She arranged to meet Miller again, this time in the back booth of a quiet bar far from town. The dim lighting and low hum of conversation gave them cover. Sarah slid a stack of photocopies across the table. "They shut me down," she said, bitterness in her voice. "Didn't even look twice." Miller wasn't surprised. He sipped his drink and muttered, "That's how it's always been. They don't want this case reopened." Sarah leaned forward. "But look at this." She pointed at the receipts. "The Dawsons booked through Northwood Holdings. And they're not the only ones. I traced 3 other disappearances linked to rentals owned by the same company." Miller's eyes sharpened. "Show me." She laid out her notes. A couple from New Hampshire in 2007, vanished after a weekend trip. A solo hiker in 2010, last seen checking into a cabin. A young man in 2013 disappeared, his rental records quietly scrubbed from the system. Her voice trembled with urgency. "This isn't just about Emily and Mark. There's a pattern. People go missing, always tied to Greaves's properties, and every time the records vanish or get rewritten." Miller stared at the documents, his jaw tight. "I suspected as much. But you've connected the dots better than I ever could. If this is true, we're looking at more than negligence. We're looking at cover-ups spanning years." Sarah's stomach knotted. "So why hasn't anyone spoken up? Why hasn't this blown open already?" Miller set his glass down with a thud. "Because Greaves doesn't just own land. He owns loyalty. He's the kind of man who makes sure people remember who pays their salaries, who funds their campaigns, who keeps their businesses alive. You think a deputy making 40 grand a year is going to risk everything crossing him?" The words stung because they rang true. Sarah stared at the stack of papers, feeling the enormity of it pressing against her chest. She wasn't just dealing with one corrupt landlord. She was standing against an entire network that thrived on silence. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Then what chance do we have?" Miller studied her for a long moment. "Sometimes chance is all you need, but you've got to play it smart, get undeniable proof, enough that even his allies can't protect him." Sarah nodded, but fear crept into her bones. On the way home, she couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. Every set of headlights in her rearview mirror made her stomach clench. She told herself it was paranoia, until a black SUV lingered behind her for several miles, turning when she turned, slowing when she slowed. Her pulse raced. She pulled abruptly into a gas station, heart pounding, and watched as the SUV rolled past without stopping. Relief washed over her, but it was thin, fragile. Whoever sent her that warning text wasn't bluffing. Back in her apartment, she locked the door and sat on the floor, clutching her phone. For the first time, she allowed herself to admit she was scared. Not just of Greaves, but of what this pursuit was doing to her. Her runs felt different now, less about freedom, more about glancing over her shoulder. Yet even through fear, the memory of the Dawsons drove her forward. She pictured Emily's embroidered blanket, the rattle, the receipts. They weren't just victims in a forgotten story. They were anchors pulling her deeper into the truth. Miller's warning echoed in her mind. "Don't let it burn you alive." Sarah whispered into the silence, "I can't stop now." And deep down, she knew stopping was no longer an option. The night was moonless when Sarah returned to the cabin. The forest pressed in around her, shadows shifting with every gust of wind. Her flashlight beam cut narrow paths through the darkness, but her grip on it was tight, her knuckles white. She had told herself this was just another run, another exploration, but deep down she knew this was a mission. The chain still hung across the front door, padlock glinting faintly. Sarah's pulse quickened as she slipped through the broken side window again, landing softly inside. The air was heavier now, stale and suffocating, as if the cabin resented her intrusion. She forced herself toward the hatch. The wood creaked beneath her as though warning her back. Her hand trembled as she pulled it open. The scent of damp earth and rust rose to meet her, sharp and choking. She descended quickly, boots sinking into the soil at the bottom. Her flashlight swept across the basement walls. She had come prepared this time, with a small camera strapped to her chest, its red light blinking. Miller's words echoed in her mind. Get undeniable proof. That was why she was here, not just to see, but to record. She moved methodically, capturing everything. The boxes, the hooks with rotting coats, the suitcase spilling clothes. Her light lingered on the baby blanket she had left folded in its box. She whispered, almost reverently, "Emily," before forcing herself onward. Something caught her eye on the far wall. She pushed aside warped boards and found a door, half concealed behind stacked crates. Its surface was rough, reinforced with iron hinges. She tugged, and to her surprise, it opened with a groan. A narrow tunnel stretched beyond, carved into the earth. The air inside was damp and cold, carrying a faint metallic tang. Her stomach clenched, but she stepped inside, her camera catching every detail. The tunnel was low, forcing her to stoop as she walked. Her light revealed strange details, scratch marks etched into the dirt walls, a broken shoe lying abandoned, and further in, an old tripod with no camera attached. She touched it, the metal icy against her fingers. Her chest tightened. "Someone filmed down here," she whispered, horrified by the thought. The tunnel bent sharply, ending in a wider chamber. Shelves lined the walls, filled with old VHS tapes, their labels smudged with moisture. Sarah picked one up, her hand shaking. The handwriting was barely legible, but one word stood clear. Dawson. Her breath caught. The tapes weren't just evidence, they were confessions stored and hidden underground. Her flashlight flickered, plunging the chamber into momentary darkness. Panic surged through her chest. She slapped the light until it steadied again. Every sound felt amplified now, the drip of water, the shuffle of her own shoes, the pounding of her heart. She grabbed 2 tapes, shoving them into her backpack. The camera on her chest blinked steadily, documenting everything. She turned to leave, forcing herself back down the narrow tunnel. But halfway through, the hatch above slammed shut with a violent crash. Sarah froze, her blood running cold. Someone else was here. She scrambled to the ladder, her breath ragged. She pushed at the hatch, but it wouldn't budge. Fear clawed at her throat. She banged against it, whispering frantically, "Come on, come on!" For a moment, silence. Then, faint footsteps above, deliberate and slow. Her hands shook as she pressed her shoulder against the hatch, shoving with all her strength. At last the wood gave way with a splintering crack, the chain rattling violently. She burst into the main room, chest heaving, eyes scanning the shadows. Empty. Whoever had been there was gone, or maybe they were still watching. She bolted through the broken window into the night, branches clawing at her arms as she sprinted down the trail. Her lungs burned, but she didn't stop. Not until the cabin was far behind her, swallowed by the dark forest. Only then did she slow, dropping to her knees, gasping for air. Her backpack weighed heavy, but inside it were 2 tapes, proof that the Dawson's story had been buried for too long. And Sarah knew she had just crossed the point of no return. The town square buzzed with anticipation on the day of the annual harvest festival. Booths lined the streets, filled with pumpkins, hot cider, and the laughter of children. But beneath the cheerful atmosphere, Sarah felt a storm building in her chest. Her backpack pressed heavy against her shoulders, not from weight, but from what it carried. The 2 VHS tapes, her camera, and the photocopied files Miller had given her. Howard Greaves was there, of course. He always was, smiling as he shook hands, his presence like a monarch surveying loyal subjects. His tailored coat and polished shoes set him apart from the crowd. People greeted him warmly, their trust unshaken. Sarah's stomach churned as she watched. She thought of Emily's blanket, the reservation slip, the basement filled with tapes. The truth pulsed inside her like a live wire. She couldn't keep it hidden anymore. Miller appeared at her side, his face grim. "You don't have to do this here," he murmured. "Yes, I do," Sarah replied. her voice steady despite the fear twisting in her gut. "They all need to see who he really is." Before Miller could stop her, she stepped forward, climbing onto the small wooden stage where a local band had just finished playing. The crowd quieted, curious. Greaves turned, his smile widening in polite confusion. Sarah's voice rang out. "My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I know the truth about Emily and Mark Dawson." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Greaves tilted his head, still smiling, but his eyes sharpened. "They didn't vanish before they reached the cabin," Sarah continued. Her voice trembled at first, then grew stronger. "They were there. I've seen the basement, the one that isn't on any map, the one none of you were ever told about. I found their belongings. I found their names on tapes hidden underground." Gasps filled the square. Miller stepped closer, watching Greaves like a hawk. Greaves laughed lightly, his tone smooth. "Miss Mitchell, I understand your concern. But these are wild claims, and this is hardly the place—" Sarah cut him off, her anger breaking through. "Don't you dare dismiss me. I have the proof." She yanked the reservation slip from her pocket, holding it high. "This is their booking confirmation, and these—" She pulled the tapes from her backpack, the labels visible, "are marked with their name. Explain that, Mr. Greaves." The crowd erupted in whispers. Greaves's smile faltered for the first time. His eyes flicked toward the sheriff standing near the stage, as if calling in a silent favor. But Miller stepped up, his voice booming. "She's not lying. I worked that case. I saw files disappear, I saw evidence vanish, and every path led back to him." The tension in the air thickened. Greaves's polished facade cracked under the weight of eyes suddenly less trusting, less admiring. His voice turned sharp. "You're accusing me of crimes with no basis. This is slander." Sarah's heart pounded, but she refused to back down. "It's not slander if it's the truth. You buried people's lives. You erased their stories." "But not anymore." The sheriff stepped forward, his hand raised as if to calm the storm. But before he could speak, members of the crowd began shouting, "What about the Dawsons? Is it true? We deserve answers." The once celebratory square now bristled with anger and doubt. Greaves tried to smile again, but it looked brittle, forced. His control was slipping. Miller leaned close to Sarah, his voice low. "You just lit the match. Now let's see how far this fire spreads." Sarah's knees trembled, but she stood tall, her voice steady as she faced Greaves directly. "You can hide behind money and power, but you can't hide the truth forever. It always finds a way out." The festival no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like the beginning of a reckoning. The days after the festival blurred into a storm of headlines, whispers, and tension that clung to every corner of the town. Sarah woke each morning to a new wave of messages, some praising her courage, others warning her to disappear before she ended up like the Dawsons. Her phone buzzed non-stop, reporters trying to reach her, relatives of missing persons asking for answers she didn't yet have. The FBI arrived within the week. Their black SUVs parked outside the sheriff's office sent a shock through the community. For years, people had whispered about corruption and cover-ups, but now federal agents moved with quiet authority, seizing files, reopening evidence, and combing through the cabin itself. Sarah stood on the trail one morning, watching from a distance as agents in jackets marked FBI disappeared into the trees. For the first time, she felt the weight of the cabin lifting from her shoulders. It wasn't just her fight anymore. Miller joined her, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. "Never thought I'd see this day," he muttered. "You did this," Sarah told him. He shook his head. "No, we did this. You refused to let it die." A week later, the basement was uncovered officially. Agents carried out boxes wrapped in evidence tape, blankets, clothes, receipts, and the tapes Sarah had left behind. It became impossible to deny. The Dawsons had been there, others too. Howard Greaves was arrested that same evening. The image of him being led away in cuffs spread fast. His once pristine reputation shattered in hours. Still, he maintained his innocence, his lawyer calling the accusations fabricated nonsense. But Sarah had seen the tapes, and though she refused to watch them herself, knowing what they likely contained, she had handed them over without hesitation. The FBI confirmed the worst. The Dawsons' final moments had been recorded, along with others who had vanished in similar ways. News anchors called it a chilling discovery. To Sarah, it was something more, a confirmation of what her instincts had screamed all along. Emily and Mark hadn't chosen to disappear. They hadn't been careless hikers who wandered too far. They had been trapped, hidden away and forgotten until someone cared enough to look again. Still, the truth came with a bitter edge. The FBI's report confirmed what Sarah had feared. The Dawsons had died in that cabin basement. The timeline wasn't clear, whether it was days or weeks after they vanished, but their lives had ended beneath the earth. When Sarah read the report, her throat tightened. She sat in silence, staring at the embroidered blanket she had taken out once more, the delicate letters ED frayed but still visible. She whispered softly, "You deserved better. Both of you." Miller visited her that evening. He carried 2 cups of coffee, setting one on her table without a word. For a long time they sat in silence, the weight of justice and loss filling the room. Finally he said, "You gave their families something no one else did. Closure. It's not enough, but it's something." Sarah nodded slowly. Closure doesn't erase what happened, but maybe it stops the silence from swallowing them whole. The town shifted uneasily in the weeks that followed. Some residents avoided her, afraid of what she represented. Others thanked her in hushed voices, grateful that the truth had finally surfaced. The cabin was sealed permanently, its entrance boarded and guarded while investigators scoured every inch. Some called for it to be burned down, a symbol of purging the past. Sarah wasn't sure. To her, erasing it felt too much like repeating history. The cabin was ugly, but it was also proof of what had been hidden too long. As she stood once more on the trail, watching autumn leaves scatter across the forest floor, Sarah realized the story wasn't just about the Dawsons anymore. It was about every name, every family, every silence that had been forced into the dark. And though justice had come at last, questions still lingered, questions that might never be answered. The crisp Vermont air carried the first bite of winter as Sarah laced her trail shoes. The forest, once a place of fear and hidden truths, stretched before her in silence. She inhaled deeply, grounding herself in the scent of pine and frost. Running had always been her escape, but now it had become something else, her way of remembering, of honoring the lives that had been lost. The Dawsons case was officially closed. Headlines declared justice served, Greaves indicted, the tapes secured in evidence. Yet closure was a complicated thing. For Emily's parents, it came with tears and the weight of grief that had no end. For Mark's brother Jason, it came with anger at the years stolen by lies. And for Sarah, closure came with a strange mixture of relief and guilt. She hadn't known Emily and Mark personally, but she carried them with her now. Every step she took on the trails reminded her of that basement, of the embroidered blanket, of the silence that had tried to erase them. Miller joined her sometimes on her runs. His pace was slower, his breath heavier, but his presence steady. One morning, as they paused at an overlook where golden leaves blanketed the valley below, he said quietly, "You did more than I ever could." Sarah shook her head. "We both carried this. I just happened to be the one who tripped over the truth first." He gave her a look both stern and proud. "You didn't trip over it. You chased it down. There's a difference." Sarah smiled faintly, though her chest still felt heavy. "It doesn't feel like a victory." "It's not supposed to," Miller replied. "Justice never balances the scale completely, but it shifts the weight enough for people to breathe again." His words stayed with her long after. She realized he was right. Her fight hadn't erased the past, but it had stopped silence from being the final word. That night, Sarah sat at her desk, the baby blanket folded neatly in front of her. The FBI had catalogued everything, but she had been allowed to keep the one item that had pulled her deeper into the mystery. She traced the initials with her fingertip, Edie, and whispered, "You're not forgotten." Her phone buzzed with a new message from a number she didn't recognize. For a split second, fear surged. Another warning? But when she opened it, her breath caught. "Thank you. Jason Dawson." Tears blurred her vision. She pressed the blanket to her chest, allowing herself to cry freely for the first time since this all began. The following weekend, she returned to the trail where it had all started, the overgrown path, the one that led to the clearing where the cabin had once loomed. The authorities had sealed it, boarded the doors and posted signs forbidding entry. Still, Sarah stood at the tree line staring into the shadows. She whispered to the forest, "The truth leaves a trail. Someone just has to be stubborn enough to follow it." Her feet carried her back onto safer paths, but her heart lingered there, tied forever to the place where silence had broken, and voices had finally been heard. Sarah didn't know what her next fight would be. But she knew she wouldn't run from it. She had found strength she hadn't known she possessed, forged not on finish lines or medals, but on truth, pain, and persistence. As she crested a ridge, the wind whipping against her face, she felt a strange peace. The Dawson story had ended, but not in silence. It had ended with justice, with voices rising against power, with proof that even buried secrets can be unearthed. Before closing this chapter, remember, if you want to hear more stories where hidden truths come to light, subscribe to this channel. And don't stop here, click on the video suggested on your screen right now to continue the journey with us. Because stories like these remind us all, silence may hide the truth for a time, but it can never erase it.